Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Iron Culture. It is me, Eric Trexler, and I, of course, am your normal standard host. And tonight I am joined by a very special guest. I was not sure if Helms was ever going to come back to the show. Obviously, he's been gone for a while, stopped attending, and as I covered as a journalist on a previous episode, he was saying a lot of things that made me question his dedication to really the iron in general and the culture that surrounds it. So very pleased to see that you've had a change of heart and you've come back, and you are always welcome. I just didn't know if you were still into this stuff. So lovely to see you, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, so I am not going to acknowledge that, Trex. I guess I just did by saying Trex. I can't help myself being nice. But I will just speak directly to the cult who has known me since the start. And I will say that don't worry, Papa is home and everything is going to be fine. And let's just make sure that things are clear, because that claim that I don't think is worth repeating, and in fact, the specific claims on the last episode where you had the good Dr. Colenso Semple on with you, that I had denigrated individual iron disciplines, including Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, and powerlifting, with specific quotes that will not be repeated, but broadly that I had eschewed the iron game, frankly, are offensive and preposterous, and also they directly conflicted with the claims made on the prior episode, where it was stated that I boycotted the episode with the good Dr. Mark Lewis, strength conditioning coach for American football, because I only have interest in the iron game, and that I will refer to obscure Olympic weightlifting comps, and which I think was kind of said with almost a dismissive tone. So I'm not sure if this was trying to deflect some of the negative commentary that was coming your way from that, or maybe there was just a moment of, I don't know, it was a poor decision, a lack of lucidness, but to have just 1 week apart, me boycotting an episode because it wasn't iron game focused enough, which wasn't even true, and then the next week for me to be disparaging the iron game as a whole, when in fact I was actually away because I was attending for, I would point out, the 5th year, I believe, the European Powerlifting Conference, and also doing an event with both TechnoGym and Optimum Nutrition, where we were doing co-branded presentations to educate the good people out there who are interested in lifting weights. Frankly, I was disappointed, and I'm here to come back and make sure that everyone knows that nothing has changed, and things are only getting bigger and better and more jacked and more tan and more strong. And the iron cult is as strong as it's ever been. And I am still here as a part of that community, contributing to it. So I don't know if you feel you need to make any apologies, or if maybe we just want to, say some things were in bad taste. You've lived and learned. You want to move on, but I'll give you the floor back, my friend.
I think it'd be a good opportunity to get some clarification. So you're telling me that you did not say that bodybuilding has too much pageantry and therefore isn't a sport. You're saying that you did not say that.
That is correct. I think it would be impossible to find me saying that on the record unless it was a deep fake from AI.
Okay, and then you're also claiming, and again, I'm just asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
You're claiming that in regards to powerlifting, you didn't say 1 rep, big deal, wake me up when they can do 3. You didn't make that claim.
I did not.
Okay, so it appears a little game of telephone, some wires got crossed, maybe a quote was misattributed. I will get back to my sources and try to see if we can get to the root to this of this miscommunication. So work will be done, and I'm sure one of us will be vindicated. And to address your concern about the timeline of events, the way I saw it unfolding, based on some of the sourcing I had, which has always been reliable, it seemed to me that you lost interest in sport and therefore you boycotted the Mark Lewis um, interview because he's a sports scientist. You've also always had a cagey relationship with data. So sports and data, you put those two things together. He's jumping ship. And then I assume that you subsequently, the following week, also lost your passion for the Iron Game. So it's not that you boycotted the first because of the second. To me, it seemed like a very rapid, precipitous decline where you essentially lost interest in both sport, data, science. Saying both, it's really a laundry list: sport, data, science, and then ultimately bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic weightlifting. And some people may say, oh, those quotes were off the record, you can't prove them, etc. But here's my thing. I feel like a person who still cared about all those things would have been there for the culture. And I feel like you left the culture high and dry. So I'm not saying anything. I'm asking questions. I'll get back to my sourcing. Everything, the light will shine. We will get to all the lack of clarity and ultimately get to the truth. But in terms of you and the culture, I think that's between you and them in terms of how you want to show them how committed you are to being part of that culture. And, I'm one of those people, I don't get bogged down in the past. I'm always thinking forward. So I would say things happen, people drift, and then they come back, they right the ship. So as long as you're here for the next 2 weeks, I think that'd be a clear show of faith that you are down for the cult and you are locked back in. So unless something's going to happen, and if you think that'll be a problem, then again, I'm not sure how we reconcile all these moving pieces.
I'll say two things. First, I will take some ownership that as soon as those episodes came out, I probably should have made some social media posts on my own to clarify things instead of letting the stigma sit, because as you will find out when you check with your sources, not only were those things, it's inaccurate to even say that those things were said in jest or out of context. They weren't said at all. But, as I was traveling for, academic conferences for powerlifting, sports nutrition, and a global education event for lifters for TechnoGym, and meeting up with both academics and bodybuilders in this space, I didn't have the time to clarify that I have not, eschewed or been disillusioned or stepped away from data, sports science, or bodybuilding or powerlifting or strength sport in general. Because I was too busy, directly engaging with those things. Even yesterday, I was thinking about posting it. But unfortunately, I was a little too busy guest lecturing for our internship in strength conditioning at the Sports Performance Research Institute in New Zealand, in the labs where I'm the strength conditioning lab leader, where I also did my master's and PhD in sport and exercise, and where I am still a senior research fellow specifically in the sports physiology and nutrition as well as strength conditioning streams, where we collect data on sports science, do sports science, and actively teach a large sports science program that's ranked in the top 50 in the world. So, I didn't have the opportunity while doing that to specifically mention that I am invested in sports science data and generally. So,
that makes
also,
sense. But I do think it's just in very poor taste, like, being a fellow in that laboratory is fantastic. I don't think they need to take any jabs at your age. Why do they have to call you a senior fellow? I mean, to me, that's just really inappropriate. I feel like you don't need to bring attention to that. You know what I mean?
Well, the one thing I do like about certain communities and cultures, maybe not some of the ones I participate in my non-AUT work, is that age is seen as something that is to be respected, rather than something that's by bringing it up is seen as a jab. So those cultural differences are a little different here at, maybe the university versus in other places like math.
Yeah.
But, we'll strive to shift that culture. It's difficult to lead if you aren't respected, but you do what you can. The final thing I would say related to the next 2 weeks, and I can understand how this is awkward timing and that I just stated I was committed to the cult. But the next 2 weeks, I will not be able to make Iron Culture because I am specifically 11 days out from my first competition, notably a bodybuilding competition, which I have been discussing and preparing for. So I am going to go compete in the WNBF. I think they call it the Diamond Cup. It's the 10-year anniversary of WNBF Taiwan's show. So I'll be competing in the amateur classic physique and pro bodybuilding division. Really excited about that, actually. And just bought the tickets, paid my entry fees, all that good stuff.
Two-sport athlete.
Yes, I'm following in the footsteps of many a great other two-sport athletes like Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson, and notably yourself, Dr. Trexler. And I would hope that you would understand the commitment it would take to be a two-sport athlete, and that,
Been there.
yes, that you would perhaps forgive my absence from the cult for the next 2 weeks, and also accept my appreciation for you holding it down. And perhaps just if anything does come up in the next 2 episodes where you hear some claim that I am somehow not committed to the iron game, bodybuilding, sports science, strength conditioning, you may think, what did Eric say in that last episode he was on? And if he is missing this episode, why? And if it's him because he's actively competing in a bodybuilding show, perhaps that might not signify a lack of commitment to bodybuilding just because he can't make these 2 episodes. So just some things to consider for the next 2 weeks.
I could be I was led to believe that you had gotten very deep into cinema, and so you were done with sport, you were done with science, you were done with the iron game, and you were now just really into film and the art of making film, which is a very notable endeavor, a very respectable endeavor indeed. So I wasn't judging, but it appears there's been a miscommunication. So Helms, with all this
Actually,
stuff,
on that note, I will say there has been actually a substantive effort on my part to be dedicated to cinema. And perhaps ironically, and maybe the source of some frustration or feeling left out, it is actually the Iron Culture documentary, which is in its final edits, which was a pre-Iron
just
Culture
enough time to cut me in.
Yeah. I don't know about that. And
with AI, you can't just put me in some of these scenes?
Unfortunately, we've committed to not using AI in the Iron Culture documentary. It was something we did a priori to make it, retain that cult connection, if you will.
And so it's all practical effects, all the stunts, all the illusions, that's all practical. None of it was done in post.
We did all of our own stunts.
Okay.
Yeah. The stones were lifted by us, not doubles, when we were able to lift them, which was rare because they're pretty heavy out there in Ireland. But yeah. So if you need to talk on air to me about the fact that we're releasing a documentary for Iron Culture in which you're not part of it, this is it's a capstone on the Omar Helms era, and it was fully filmed before you were part of it. If that is something that perhaps is causing maybe a passive aggressive response, maybe we just talk about that off air. We don't air a dirty.
No, I don't think this is a feelings and emotion thing. I think it's strictly a legal thing. And so all I would ask is small concession on your end, and Omar. I'm sure he'll go along with this. All I would ask is that when you release this quote unquote so-called documentary, is that you spell Iron Culture with a K. The same way that if you were going to have imitation crab meat, it would be crab with a K. I think this is ultimately, the world has changed. The Iron Culture is now me and my surrounding universe. So I think as a sign of respect, that's all I would ask, is a minor tweak in spelling. Just to let people know this is an imitation culture.
I acknowledge that you're asking that.
Perfect. All right. So Helms, you got stuff going on. Where do you want to start here? Because this is, all joking aside, you've been busy. You've been doing
I have.
travel, talk, etc. engaging with the iron world, and then you got a couple weeks here where you're traveling for competition. So this is basically your shot to talk to the good people and give them an update on what's going on in your life. So where do you want to take it from here?
Well, the first thing I want to do is leave them dangling on that
Mm,
precipice with anticipation before we note a good word from our sponsor.
big time. Helms, did you see the last time that I gave this pitch?
I did.
Did you hear it? So the first time I was like, I lost those straps and wrist wraps when I was moving. Completely false, because Elite FTS, they manufacture their equipment so well, you won't lose it. That's how good it is. They have found a way to make it somehow stick in your mind in such a way that even when you move apartment to apartment to apartment to house, you will retain these precious items. So, folks, I had the good sense in the year, I believe somewhere around 2010-ish, 2011 maybe. I knew I needed some heavy-duty lifting straps, and I needed some heavy-duty wrist wraps to keep my wrists happy with all the irresponsible bench pressing and squatting and other pressing that I was going to be doing. And as a fine gentleman of Central Ohio at the time, I knew the highest quality products in the world were down the road at Elite FTS. And we have been so privileged, so humbled by the opportunity to partner with the good people at Elite FTS, Dave Tate and crew. And so if you are in the market for any lifting-oriented apparel or gear, we're talking high-quality bands, wraps, straps, you name it. If it has something to do with lifting, they probably got it in the shop. Head over to EliteFTS.com. Use our promotional code MRR10, stands for Mass Research Review 10. That'll get you 10% off most things that they carry in their store. Anything I left out, Helms?
No. I mean, just that
Beautiful.
you've been, and by the way, you've done a fantastic job holding it down. And we're very proud of this partnership. And yeah, big shout out to Dave Tate. Big shout out to Elite FTS.
Yeah.
And it's an easy one for me and Trex, both having been customers for a long time.
Well, yeah. I mean, now that I think about it, one of the nice, I mean, obviously you can look through the history of the show. We don't like go reaching for all sorts of promotions and sponsorships and whatnot. What's really cool about this one is Dave Tate, the legend has it, I wasn't even involved at this point, was one of our very first, like, original OG subscribers to the Mass Research Review. We offered him, when we saw he signed up, the story goes, a free subscription. He said, no, thank you. I'd like to pay for it. And again, even before, a million years ago, I was a loyal customer of Elite FTS. I got their wraps, their straps. I think I even, if there are any photos of me floating around from that era, I know I had a prized Elite FTS shirt that I used to wear. It was like my very comfortable kind of oversized gym shirt. Yeah, with that classic like squatting logo.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is cool about this partnership, is that it was a partnership before it was a partnership. You know what I mean? We supported their gear because we liked it. They supported our content because they liked it. Of course, Elite FTS has a lot of great content of their own. They don't just make gear. So if you like us, we support them. We think you should as well. So check out EliteFTS.com.
And with that, we'll get back to the cliffhanger, the precipice of what's going on in the Helms world. So yeah, I am back from a 2-week trip that was really cool, Trex. So all serious now, we'll drop the fake banner. It was a pretty cool opportunity. From the 3rd to the 8th, I was in Bali, and that was for TechnoGym's global education event. TechnoGym normally has this event in Cesena, Italy, at their HQ, which is a really cool spot that I was in back in the middle of the year, where I got to do a co-branded seminar with them in WBF Italy. Bit of biomechanics, and then on the WBF side, some nutrition. So I got to do that presentation on biomechanics again with more hands-on, with a lot of their Asian delegates. So there was, like, I think 11 different countries. We're talking Philippines, Korea, Japan, India, Malaysia, you name it, Thailand. They were all there. This is a really cool event. And I had a lot of, I would say, variability in who attended. I had some people who were competitive natural bodybuilders who specifically came out to see me, but I had people who had no idea who I was, who were just in the broader fitness space, and they were looking to, increase their education. And I was only one of the 5 educators who TechnoGym brought out. So big shout out to everybody else. It was pretty cool. There were people who are top level coaches in functional fitness. There was representatives from the most popular gym chain in Hong Kong. People who are experts in pregnancy and women's health. So it was a really cool event, and it was a challenge for me as an educator. I'm sure you can appreciate this. There was one session, because we split these folks up into into fifths, and they rotated through, where I had a pro natural bodybuilder with a master's degree in biomechanics sitting there, as well as a physiotherapist who was a competitive bodybuilder himself, sitting next to a wellness director manager who didn't lift weights. And I had to kind of talk to them both about biomechanics for bodybuilding and display it. So it was a really welcome challenge as an educator. And it was really fun to try to make it applicable, engaging, and interesting to people who probably weren't looking forward to that session out of the 5, and people who were exclusively there for that and would grudgingly sitting through the other ones, So, and we got really great feedback from everybody. So, a little bit of a pat on the back, but it was also an awesome experience. And I had never been to Bali before. And Bali is like influencer central, and we were in, we were in an area that probably didn't get me a huge exposure to true, Indonesian culture, but I was very fortunate. Shout out to Brandon Kempter, who attended. Brandon Kempter, he's an Australian bodybuilder who's been living in Bali for the last few years, him and his partner, and he lives with a very local lifestyle, a little bit outside of the main area. So he took me on his moped, which, by the way, if you get on the streets of Bali, it's like armies of mopeds going around. And what you can fit on a moped shocked me. Like what we do in the West with like a contractor who gets like a van and he's got a ladder, 3 other guys, all this stuff, a pane of glass, all that you can fit on a moped. And if you ask me how, I tell you, got to see it to believe it. But yeah, quite literally, I was floored by the ingenuity of the locals and what was getting done there. It is a great experience for me, and I truly relish the opportunity to reach beyond my linguistic and cultural limitations. Trex, this is some Star Trek shit, okay? The majority of attendees could speak English. Some couldn't. We had a Korean delegation and some delegates from China who needed translation. We didn't have a translator. We had this specific device where the speaker and the listener both wear a headset, okay? They set it to their own language, and then in real time, it interprets back and forth into your ear. And there was one other person who was there for both the Korean and the Chinese delegates who was bilingual, but wasn't, like live translating. They were just double checking to make sure it worked okay. And you get everything. And they're like, yeah, totally understood. And I was telling jokes. I was speaking in, English sport and exercise biomechanics terms. I was trying to limit my jargon, but it seemed to be fine, which blew my mind. So that technology is advancing, but it was a really good experience. The one thing that was interesting was that for this 2 weeks, because after that I went to Europe, which I'll get into next, the goal was for me to simply not be in a huge calorie deficit and get flat and depleted and come back 2 weeks out in the hole. I would say semi-mission accomplished. I really was truly trying to, eat and not be in a massive deficit, but we were working, man. And it was in the heat, a ton of steps. Access to food was not always super, super consistent. So I would sometimes have to make it up here and there. I'm going off hunger, but I'm engaged and I'm moving, and it's so much higher energy expenditure than I'm used to. I basically got into stage shape while I was there. I hit probably the leanest I've ever been, and that's where I'm at now, which is pretty cool. About 2 weeks out, I'm about as lean as I was back for Worlds 2023. And here's this. The lowest weigh-in I've seen is still 2 kilos heavier than the lowest weigh-in I ever saw in 2023. So I look back at my logs. 78.1 was my 2 lowest, deep, darkest weigh-ins out of all of 2023. And I've had one weigh-in at 80.1, and it was coming back from the trip, probably dehydrated because now I'm back up into the high 80s, low 81s. So I have probably put on legitimately 4 pounds of lean mass, 2 kilos-ish, since 2023, which I'm very proud of.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that, went to
Out of curiosity,
yeah, go ahead.
how hot was it in American units in Bali when you were there?
It wasn't too bad because summers flipped, so we weren't in summer. Summer in Bali is a different time period. So everyone's thinking, oh, you were summer in Bali, but it's not summer there. Summer is like December, January, February range. So it was in American units, I will tell you, let's see, 30 degrees Celsius. Wasn't too crazy. It was in the mid 80s.
Okay.
On most days. Some days it got a little higher, but the good news is, my metabolic rate is tanked. I have no insulation, so I was fine.
I was gonna say, man, like, I did a prep where I was really grinding it out in like late July in North Carolina, where it's humid and, mid to high 90s often. And honestly, that is the best way to be when you're really grinding your prep, because first of all, you're more comfortable day in and day out. Because your thyroid hormones in the basement, most likely, you have no fat. So you're going to feel cold all the time.
Yep.
And then on top of that, like this is kind of one of my fun little, hobby horse topics, but I'm very intrigued at the relationship between ambient temperature and appetite regulation. And man, like there is really something special about being slightly uncomfortably hot in terms of suppressing, I don't know if I want to say appetite necessarily, but certainly desire to eat. You know what I mean?
That's a good way of saying it. Yes.
And yeah, so like for me, if you told me I was going to be prepping during the colder months, I'd say I'll pass. Like to me, the warmer months are so much easier. Have you noticed, because you've done preps that have kind of spanned into colder periods of the year in terms of ambient temperature, is it as bad as it feels like it would be relative to the alternative?
I hate prepping when it's cold, dude. I freaking hate it. And it doesn't get crazy cold in Auckland. It's basically like Bay Area weather. But, like San Francisco winter's not warm,
No.
And it was, ironically, so I went then from Bali to London and Limerick, Ireland, where now it's Northern Hemisphere. So we are technically in summer. But it was very similar weather to what we're getting down here in Auckland. Because it's, London and Ireland. So like it was in the mid 50s, low 50s. So we're coming like out of the 40s in Auckland into the 50s, which I'm loving. But prior to that, so during our winter, my wife got me she's amazing. This is when you got a good one, folks. She got me a heated jacket. So you plug in a little like portable USB charger into it. It's got panels on the front, panels on the back. But I was running around every morning. We'd go to breakfast in a heated jacket, beanie, and wearing this sweatshirt underneath that heated jacket.
Yeah.
And then in the coldest portions of the month, I had this little sleeve that when I was feeling a little more confident with, being perceived as weird and, not self-conscious, I'd pull that thing up over my nose because the tip of my nose and my ears would get so just like cold to the touch. I wouldn't even know if my nose is running. It was so like, I just couldn't feel it, so
Yeah.
trying to avoid frostbite. So it's funny. I've gotten to the point where I'm so good at living the bodybuilding lifestyle that I'll be honest with you, like hunger is not much of an issue. Post-meal satiety, it's not there, but I don't really feed into that too much. So the food restriction and like food focus, it's just not nearly as bad as it used to be. Like I am definitely preoccupied. Like I lick plates and I observe it, but it's very much like, oh, that's interesting behavior. It's not like, oh my God, I'm starving. The things that I struggle with are I can't sit down now that I'm this lean for too long, or I start to get like a dead leg. I just don't have enough cushioning in my butt. Anywhere I sit, I have to put a pillow underneath me. It just makes me feel fragile and weak. I'm cold all the time.
Elite human performance right there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sit on a pillow.
Yeah. There's just like these levels of annoying fragility. Like I'm normally a super laid back guy, like chill, like whatever. Like I can live life, but it's like, well, if it's under 50 degrees, I need a heated jacket and like mittens and earmuffs.
It reminds me of what you do when you have like a 4-pound dog and you're like, I'm gonna give him the little booties and the little jacket, you know?
Yes, I am a small shivering dog in terms of my needs.
Yeah.
Like I can't sit on hard things for too long. I can't even sit on soft things for too long, to be honest, Trex, without a pillow.
Yeah. No, and that's for me, that was always really hard because like because of my history of like sacrum and back and all the issues, for me, I'm really like I can't sit on padded chairs. It bothers
Yeah.
my back. I hate it. So I sit on really hard stuff. Like even right now, I'm sitting on a metal folding chair. And
Oh my
in my
God.
office at work, I have a metal folding chair. And they're like, bro, we can get you like a nice desk chair. And I'm like, absolutely not. So for me, when I'm prepping and I'm starting to get that lean, it's really unbearable because I'm like, there's nothing I can really sit on. You know, it's tough.
I'd rather stand. Like, dude, if you gave me a metal chair to sit in right now, I'd be like, not gonna happen. I got 5 minutes before my right leg is totally numb.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that stuff is what's annoying. And trying to, I I did I think as good a job as I could, and I'm glad I went to Bali first because I got like a 3 hour jump on going to the UK. But dude, the time zone difference between New Zealand and the UK, it's basically you just flip the AM to the PM. So it's a tough one. It normally takes me 5 days to acclimate, but I did it in about 2 or 3 because I had that 3rd to the 8th in Bali, which I acclimated in about 1 or 2 days. So I kind of got that intermediary jump. And then the UK and Ireland was awesome. So are you an F1 guy? Are you into racing or
Well,
any
you know,
knowledgeable of that stuff?
before we get into that, may I do a quick detour to because you mentioned the travel and the time zone changes. We
Mm-hmm.
actually had a relevant question in the chat. Do you mind hitting that
Let's
while we're
go.
on the topic?
Let's go.
So
Yeah.
someone asked, the Greek Trojan said, what are the best tips for jet lag? Going from California to Japan, and I want to know the pro moves. And Helms, ever since you moved to New Zealand, I feel like you've got the east to west, the west to east. So what would you tell somebody in this scenario?
So basically, what you need to do is a few days in advance of where you're going to go, just get 1 or 2 hours change in advance. So if you're trying to stay up later or go to bed earlier and your partner's cool with it, or if you're living solo, if you're normally going to bed at 10 and you can go to bed at midnight or 8 p.m., it doesn't change your local schedule too much, but it will get you just quite literally like 1 day advance less of jet lag. Then the day you fly out and the day you land, I would encourage you to train during what should be daylight and get light exposure and make sure that you only eat during the typical eating window you have of where you're going. So shift your meals and then make sure that you are taking, and this is what I would recommend. This isn't medical advice. I would recommend taking melatonin in the kind of dosage range that you need, not the crazy ones that are out there. 500 micrograms up to 3 milligrams at the time of when you would need to sleep, and try to sleep on the schedule you're going to. It may or may not go well, and that's okay. If you don't sleep that much, that sleep pressure will help you the next time. But do your best not to nap during the daytime. Try to stay up. You can definitely take caffeine, I would say, before noon. Kind of refer back to our old caffeine episodes of where you're going to help you stay awake and stay active, go on walks, get sun exposure. Try not to nap based upon where you're going. So the key things are eat in the right circadian rhythm, train in the right circadian rhythm, get sun exposure, and then take melatonin. There's actually the best data on melatonin is actually dealing with jet lag for shifting where you're going, and try to get a 1 to 2 hour jump before you travel. And that can quite literally cut 1 to 2 days of jet lag off of what you're experiencing.
Yeah, if you talk to, like, I saw a talk by a Dr. Spector who's a physician at Duke who specializes in sleep. You know, he works with a lot of people with sleep disorders. When you talk to somebody, one of these days I want to get him on the show because he has a lot to share. But one of these days, one of the things that you'll see when you are talking to people who are like legit sleep experts, like people who diagnose and medically treat sleep disorders, is when they talk about melatonin, they don't talk about it as a sleep aid. They talk about it as a circadian shifter. And like, just like you were saying, that really is kind of the intended purpose of melatonin. It's not to be necessarily it's not to be a day in and day out sleep aid. It is to help shift or correct a circadian rhythm that is misaligned with, you know, what that person is trying to achieve in terms of their daily sleep and wake cycle. So absolutely, really good advice. And it sounds like the other thing you mentioned that I don't think was clearly delineated in the summary is if you can get a head start on it, try to start nudging your sleep window in the direction of what you're trying to get to, right?
Correct. So an example of this, when I was in Bali, the disparity was 4 hours to London. So when I was going to bed, like at 10 in Bali, it was, I think it's more than that actually. It was, I want to say like 4 p.m. So the last night that I was there, I stayed up till midnight and I got to bed at what was 6 p.m. London time. And that's better, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then on my flights, I had a 7-hour flight from Jakarta to Jakarta to Doha. And then I had a 15-hour flight or 16-hour flight from Doha to London. Or no, sorry, a 7-hour flight from there. I'm getting all discombobulated. I had 2 7-hour flights to get from Bali to London. And I managed to stay awake on the first 7-hour one, which put me in alignment with like 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m., and then I slept on that next one as best I could. Was it great? No. But then I stayed up the first night in London, and throughout the whole time period, I trained when I got there, got light exposure. I only ate at the right times. I took the melatonin at the right time. And again, it normally takes me 5 days to acclimate from New Zealand to London. And on the second night, I was on the right time zone. Did I sleep well? No. I was clocking like 4 to 5 hours of sleep, but it was at the right time. And I laid in bed and I tried to get a little bit more and I was kind of in and out of it. And it's difficult to separate how much of this is me being shredded in on prep and just not getting quite as good of sleep versus jet lag. And they do kind of stack, unfortunately. But it was I think the best I could have done given the circumstances. And it's the best I've experienced having traveled. So I'm really glad I took it seriously. I did all those things. I ticked those boxes. Was it comfortable sometimes not eating in prep during phases where I was awake? Absolutely not. Were my energy levels jacked up? Did I feel like my blood sugar was all over the place? I had a few hard days, but I think it resulted in me when I needed to be on, which I did, because we had this live streamed insider event at the McLaren Center, which is really cool if you're into F1 racing. And we got a full tour. There are areas we couldn't take pictures. So we had this really cool high-tech event. It felt like we're on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Every person in the room had like a little video panel where they could see the graphics. Really high production quality. I'm just really encouraged that big brands like TechnoGym and Optimum Nutrition are actually platforming education for education's sake. And they're seeing that because, frankly, I'll be real straight up here. There's money being, made now in being science-based. And there's a strong shift towards the kind of evidence-based sector. You look at Jeremy Etier, you look at Jeff Nippard, you look at the RP channel. There's a lot of questioning of science. There's a lot of pushback, and there's different silos on the internet. But broadly, science is on the rise. And there are downsides to that, like we've discussed. It can be misrepresented. But shout out to people like, the good doctor, Colenso Semple, who is fighting the good fight and trying to show people the difference between science marketing versus actual scientific claims. We've been frustrated with some things that have been stated by people like, an Andrew Huberman, or been platformed at times. We've been vocal about that. It's not about the person, it's about the claim. So as science is on the rise, there is going to be more pseudoscience, charlatans, misrepresentations, and people using it as marketing. So it's a sign of the times, though, and I try to reflect on the fact that this is a good thing. So the fact that big brands are not just platforming like who's the most jacked influencer, or who is, but they're going, you know what? We should bring out people like, I mean, it wasn't just me. So like, I'm probably the most influencery of some of the people they invited and who became the quote unquote optimum insiders. But Stu Phillips, Shona Helston, Kirstie Elliott Sale. I mean, these are top level academics who it was an honor and a privilege to present with, who have been asked by Optimum Nutrition to, hey, will you be a brand ambassador with us and basically provide education? And we all look at it like, hey, this is a win-win. Is there a minor conflict of interest? Absolutely. Are we willing to disclose that so we can further science and educate more people, reaching a much broader population? Absolutely. So that's where
here's
things
the
are
thing,
at.
though. In the near future, if you were to come out and, let's say, undermine the importance of protein, and specifically high protein diets for muscle growth, do you have any concern about your physical safety or any perhaps financial harms that might be brought on to you from using the full weight of international law?
Oh, I would be sued into existence. So no, absolutely. You're going to see me. I think my contract really starts next week. I'll be wearing an Optimum Nutrition hat, and we're going to be doing episodes on each one of the products in the full Optimum Nutrition product line.
I will
Probably
say,
starting
Helms,
with branched chain amino acids.
no, we need
So,
to start with, I don't know if they still make these, but these were dangerous. They made these little like protein zebra cakes. Did you ever see those?
I remember those. Yes.
Oh
No,
my God.
no.
They honestly tasted like a little Debbie snack. I don't know if that's internationally a recognizable reference I just made, but oh, these little prepackaged baked goods that were just absolutely decadent and allegedly had protein. So I mean,
So
what's not to like?
you mentioned that internationally recognized. One really interesting thing about Optimum Nutrition. So it was a U.S. Based company until the mid 2000s, and then Glanbia Nutrition, which is an Irish company, bought it. It actually owns a bunch of these nutrition brands. It owns BSN. It owns Think
Damn.
Protein. The bars. It also owns Isopure. So, but Optimum Nutrition is obviously its flagship. But
Yeah.
Optimum Nutrition UK has a very different product line than Optimum Nutrition US. Slightly different demographic, and in Asia it's a little different. In Australia, New Zealand it's a little different. So I've gotten exposed to different product lines in different places, and
Yeah.
it's kind of cool.
Well, I'm just curious if there is a global or international understanding of the concept of like a Hostess or Little Debbie's type. What would you even call these food items?
Yeah, they are. I think people understand the most iconic one of like the Twinkie. It's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
like it's an American confectionery. I don't know if confectionery is the best. It's a ultra processed baked good, which
Yeah.
we do quite well in the U.S.
Infinitely shelf stable,
Oh yeah.
individually packaged. Yeah, it wouldn't strike me if I if I was like in a place where people eat food that has ingredients. Where if I said, it's like a little Debbie snack, like little zebra cakes, and people would just stare at me blankly, saying, "What poison are you referring to?" But anyway, no, that's awesome though. So yeah, you were saying optimum nutrition. So you talked with this lineup. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, so that was a pretty cool event, but man, I got worked in TechnoGym, the Bali event, and in by Optimum Nutrition. So, like there was like 100 delegates in Bali, divided them to 5. So I had to give the same 3-hour presentation 5 times. So it was like a full like 3-hour break, 3-hour, 2 days in a row, then a half day. So I was very good at that presentation by the end of it. And then the event in the McLaren Center, we worked basically a full day. So we had a whole, 2-session format, started in the morning, stop for lunch. Lunch for us was actually doing a whole bunch of media sessions with the people who were invited. This wasn't like your typical fitness industry conference where it's just open to the public. They specifically invited media groups and influencers who had large social media channels to have specific access to it, and then live streamed it to a select group of other people. And it was a content creation event and education event for quote unquote insiders, the insider advantage. So our lunch break, we did get a lunch, but it was also, hey, here's your media schedule. Here's who you're doing interviews with. And then once we finished at 4:35, we did a little bit of the media break, quickly ate dinner, and then we did filming with the full film crew, which was pretty cool, in the McLaren gym, which, by the way, fully kitted out by TechnoGym, so another little connection there. But the Optimum Nutrition TechnoGym McLaren gym, this is a super high-tech gym for all their like pit crews and drivers and also employees. Basically, full media team in there, 20 people, 5 different stations, cameras, and we filmed until after 11 p.m. Content for social media related to education around creatine, fasting, protein, third-party testing, and differences between male and female physiology and when it is not relevant. So it was really cool getting to do that type of content with Kirstie Elliott-Sales, Stu Phillips, and also some really top practitioners, I should say. So we had the Chinese teams, swimming teams specifically, lead nutritionists that had got more gold medals than anybody. He was out there, and it was really cool to see him from the region, as well as Jeet Salal, who is one of the biggest promoters of natural bodybuilding in the Indian region. And we're talking 5 million YouTube subscribers, nearly 3 million Instagram subscribers. A great dude. He was there with his wife, and evidence-based science communicator who is really good at making things simplified, which is quite cool. So it wasn't just pure academics. It was a great group of people. It was a really awesome opportunity for me to simply meet them, which was awesome. And I was just, it was like, it was a mixture of people who were familiar and unfamiliar with each other. There was also Claire Farrell. She is the lead performance nutritionist for, I want to say, I'm going to get it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong soccer team because we had no idea who the other person was. Like I'm clearly not, as we've joked about, not out into sports that don't involve like lifting weights, and she is not.
But yeah,
this is true. But if it's not competing in lifting weights, it's not something I'm focused on. But she's the lead sports nutritionist for Liverpool. So Liverpool FC. So obviously, they just won, the Premier like championship, right? And I want to make sure I had it right. I actually did have it right, but I didn't want to say it wrong. So, I'm rubbing shoulders with people who are working at the highest level of elite sport in nutrition, Olympic swimmers, Olympic gold medalists, and the most competitive, football club in England. And also the academics who were, 10 years beyond my career. So it was really cool, as well as incredibly influential people. So like, it was a great cross section. Everyone was incredibly good at what they did. So it was a true honor. And then I got to bring it all home. After I finished that event, first thing in the morning, I flew out to Limerick, Ireland, and I got to do the European Powerlifting Conference, which is like, honestly, it's like coming home. I did that in 2017, 2018, 2019, and last year after they brought it back. And it's the IPF crew. It's people I see at Worlds, Sheffield, at some other international events. Mike Touchier was there. My own PhD student, Kedrick Kwan, was there presenting, which was a really cool full circle moment, where, he started as my student and now he's my peer, if not, a more of a leader in powerlifting nutrition than I am these days. So, really good experience. And just a great opportunity to connect with people. And, I just feel so privileged and grateful to have been a part of all 3 events. So, honestly, my heart's full. I'm still a little jet lagged. I haven't pooped in about a week, but the body's.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm glad you brought that up. I usually when we get together off air, the first thing I do is kind of get a rundown of your bowel movements, you know,
Yep.
frequency, when was the last one, consistency, that whole deal.
Well, I will say, in all seriousness, were looking at me like, "How are you doing this 2 or 3 weeks out? This is crazy." And I'm like, "Look, I've got experience. I know how to do this. It's not a big deal. I'm on a diet break." But frankly, there are some costs to running around the world shredded, and when you're switching time zones, there's a lot of systems which get a little messed up. And while there might be there's like a 5 day lag in total before you're like fully back to your sleep schedule, and you stack the digestive stuff on top of that, yeah, I think it would do a lot of people's heads in, and it even messes with mine now with the experience I have. But you just kind of have to accept, like it's when you go camping for a week and you're like, nothing happened, and it's fine, and then you don't think about it, you get back in prep that can really get in your head. So it's been a journey, like I had 2 nights of good sleep the last 2 nights, and that has made me feel tremendously better. And I know it will happen eventually, but I will also have a non-dormant GI tract pretty soon too. So give me a few more days, and just in time for me flying out to Taiwan, I'll have a functioning body to display on stage.
Awesome. Yeah, you've been around the world with all your travels, and you got some more travel coming up for competition. So we're all pulling for you in the culture, obviously. We did have a question in the chat about your competition. So someone asked, "Are you going to compete in Classic in Sacramento? I'm currently trying to convince a friend of mine to compete in Classic at that show. He's currently planning to compete in men's physique."
Yeah. So Muscle Mayhem, doing it. Man, I've been doing that show since literally 2009. It totally depends upon what happens. So the goal of the Muscle Mayhem, the principal goal, as well as WBF Worlds, which is going to be in LA, is to try to get as many of us 3DMJ coaches, because myself, Jeff, Alberto, and Brad, right now the plans are all of us to compete, to try to get as many of us on the same stage at the same time as possible. I'm not sure if that is possible. Myself, Berto, and myself, Berto, and Jeff, we are all WNBF pro bodybuilders. Brad took a long time off competing, and he came back, and he has not re-established pro status. He almost got his Masters Pro card, but when he won the Masters, there wasn't enough. So if he gets his Masters Pro card, we could all compete in a Masters division. And if he's able to, turn pro or get his Masters Pro card at the Mayhem, maybe we can all do it at Worlds. But for me, I have basically currently 3 divisions I can and have a desire to compete in. Classic physique as an amateur, pro masters bodybuilding, and then pro open bodybuilding. So depending upon whether or not it goes really well for me in Taiwan, and I win my pro card in Classic, which I think is actually a very low probability because it's an incredibly competitive show. They give the top 3 in the overall pro status, and they have 4 height classes, and they take the top 2 from each. So it'll be 3 out of the 8, top 2 in each division, and each division is going to have 10 to 30 people in it. So we're probably looking at a total of like 80 to 100 people, and I would need to be among the best 6 of them. So it's not impossible, and there are far fewer people over 180 centimeters tall in Taiwan than under. So I have probably the one. I am probably competing in the least competitive of those classes, but that just means I'll get into the overall if things go really well, and then get smoked by the short dudes. So we'll see. So the question of whether or not I will do Classic in the Mayhem depends upon whether or not I turn pro in Classic in Taiwan. And if the answer is yes, then I need to decide which pro division I'm going to do, because I don't think pro crossovers between categories are allowed, although you can do pro crossovers between age divisions within a category. So we shall see. It is up in the air. Most likely, not to count myself out, I suspect I will still be an amateur Classic physique competitor come the Mayhem, and I will probably do both.
Nice. Do you mind if we address some of the questions in the live chat? Some
No,
fitness-oriented stuff?
I'm honestly tired of talking about myself, believe it or not.
All right. So we had a question. I'll keep it on theme here with bodybuilding um, and a little powerlifting. So the question is, do bodybuilders target the obliques or does it make the mid-waist blocky? Follow-up question, could powerlifters benefit from oblique training or long-term Valsalva strength potential? So oblique training for a bodybuilder, for a powerlifter, what say you?
I don't think you need to do direct work in either case. I don't think like side bends are going to transfer to Valsalva or stability anyway. That's a pretty specific application of quote unquote core training. And I don't think there's much benefit to trying to directly develop them as a bodybuilder. I don't think aesthetically it would help you. I don't think you need to try to avoid it either, though. And I think you just kind of let that happen as a bodybuilder. And then if you are looking for more trunk stability as a powerlifter, I think things like anti-rotation, anti-flexion, or just more specific training of the main lifts is probably the more relevant application.
Cool. And when people, if someone were to follow up and say, what do you mean by training anti-rotation or anti-flexion? What kind of exercises would kind of fit the bill there?
Yeah, I'd suggest someone do some Googling of Palloff movements, like Palloff presses, as they're called. Essentially, this is you trying to resist being flexed, extended, or rotated. So this is specific to the sport because, if you get a bump by a spotter, you clip the rack, or if you're trying to exert control over a squat as you put it there, you don't want to bobble on your sumo. That is essentially holding a really, really heavy weight and trying to not let it jerk you around when there is a force applied to it. And a Palloff press is loading up the cable stack, but not actually necessarily moving the cable in the traditional way, but changing your lever arm so that that load that you're holding when it's close to your chest has a greater torque on you when you extend your arm, trying to rotate you that way. So you have to dynamically engage your core to prevent rotation or prevent, extension or prevent flexion, depending upon which way you're facing the cables. And there's various versions of that. There's things like, Copenhagen planks, which are like a side plank and movement. There's a lot of ways you can train that. You can also just do heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, and heavy bench, which require that dynamic stabilization. But I think there probably are less fatiguing direct pathways if you identify that as a weakness that needs to be trained as well.
Yeah. On the topic of core training, got a question here. Athletes usually train rotation with explosive stuff like medicine ball throws. But does it make sense for them to include some more strength-oriented stuff like Russian barbell twists in the 5 to 10 rep range? Should it all be high-velocity explosive stuff, or should they incorporate some heavier strength stuff in there?
I think we just need to take a step back and think about this from the same lens that we would more traditional exercises, right? So traditional thought is that we would go through phases or emphasize things in different ways, whether it's undulating, block, linear, what have you, whatever you pick your periodization model. But the general philosophy is that we build more contractile tissue, which has an opportunity cost. So when we think about long-term planning and training, we're going to have a phase where we focus on that a little bit more than other things. That additional contractile tissue should help us when we shift more towards a force production phase. And then as we get more and more close to competition or the in-season phase, or depending upon the individual athlete and what proportions are relevant for them, we're going to probably do some S&C movements that are at a more sport-specific velocity. So somewhere on that force velocity curve that is more relevant to that given sport. And potentially the deficit of that given athlete. They may be a little more force or velocity dominant. And you may decide you want to lean into that, or you may want to decide you want to try to bring up a weakness, depending upon the opportunity cost, how much you can get out of that, and what you need to invest. And the idea is that if you can produce more force, because power is force times velocity, or work over time, that will contribute to some degree. So there's this, drop off as you go from being bigger to focusing on strength to focusing on quote unquote power. And for the more force dominant athletes or sports, that drop off is less. For the more velocity dominant, it's much greater. And a simple way of thinking of this is to play soccer. You probably don't need a 500-pound squat, But if you are trying to be a lineman, probably can't squat too much, kind of perspective, even though they are both team sports that are heavily power based. So, going back to the question, if you are doing any movement that is explosively done and done for power, because that is more sport specific, then you just need to trace back and think, oh, well, would it benefit me for those same muscle groups to be bigger, and to what extent? And then would it benefit them to try to have a more direct kind of raw, slow force production phase as well? And the answer will vary depending upon the context, but sometimes the answer would be yes, it does. Like if you're in a scrum, or if you're on a line, or if you're a wrestler, there's going to be times where you need to move slowly and produce as much force as possible, or move quickly and produce as much power as possible. So different horses, different courses.
Nice. There's a couple I'm going to take here. One person said, nice hat, Trex. Thank you very much. That's one for me. Another question here. Is there any literature on P ratios for people who have lost a considerable amount of body fat and kept it off, then got into lifting seriously and trying to put on muscle? The short answer is, I don't think so. That's a pretty unique scenario. But in the interest of being helpful, or at least giving something resembling an answer without just being somewhere between speculative and wrong, my 2 cents on this question in general is, I'm not sure what you would do with that information. And what I mean by that is, in theory, a person who has lost a considerable amount of body fat, that tells me that they began with excess body fat. And so essentially that is, you could call it a fitness decision, but at the end of the day, that is a health improving intervention to lose a considerable amount of weight and keep it off. Then a secondary question after this person has done that, or a secondary choice is, you know what? I believe I'd like to be muscular as well. And we could, kind of theorize, will they be at a greater advantage, a greater disadvantage, a completely neutral, neither an advantage nor a disadvantage. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to play the cards they've got. And so a lot of times people might ask this and say, is this going to be harder for me than the average person now that I've lost the weight and I'm trying to build this muscle? Is it going to be easier? Is it going to be neither? And my question always back to them is, so what? What are you going to do? If I tell you this is going to be 15% harder, you're going to say, oh, never mind. It's like, if so, that's really not a good, we're way off in terms of how we're approaching this, right? So my not very helpful, but maybe kind of helpful answer is to, with this kind of question, kind of rethink, where is this coming from and where is it going? And a lot of times, I find that these questions come from people who are just kind of nervous. I think this is going to be really hard. And I will tell you, if you set ambitious body composition goals, you're going to reach the hard part. If you keep pushing it, it will get hard. And the fact that it will get hard eventually doesn't mean that it's any less worth pursuing. If it's important to you, I encourage you to go for it. And whether you think it's going to be easy or you think it's going to be hard, it's probably going to end up getting hard, like I said. But if you're kind of pushing it to get more and more and more muscular, we all reach the hard part if we keep trying. So what I usually encourage people to do is just focus on what's in your control, focus on best practices, have goals that are ultimately realistic. And sometimes that balance between setting an ambitious body composition goal and a realistic one is an iterative process. So Helms, honest to God, when I was younger, and I was getting really into fitness and growing well and still staying lean, like I'm not one of two. I'm in terrible shape, Helms. I don't know if anyone's told you. You may have noticed that every time we post something where I show up on a mass thing now, people just say, why is Eric so fat now? So that's real. That's a thing that happens. But from the age of like 14 to like 20, I was like really jacked the whole time. Like I stayed very lean. I went straight from wrestling shape into bodybuilding shape. It worked out well for me. But basically, I forget where I was going with that. I got sidetracked and then you started shaking your head. What was I talking about?
So you were talking about how challenging it is, but it is worth it to go through body composition change. And then you were talking about how anyone who I'm not actually not sure, to be honest, Rex.
Yeah, I went on a tangent. I got lost. I got confused. But basically, the moral of the story is you're going to reach the hard part. Oh yeah, that's where I was going. I knew there was a reason. So I was talking about how it's iterative. The trade
Yes.
off between setting ambitious and realistic body comp goals. Well, I was on this like precipitous rise in my own mind of getting more and more and more jacked, and I was like, oh, this is incredible. I'm great at this. It's easy. And there was a time when I was literally thinking at the age of about 18, like, man, I think I need to decide right now if I'm going to go the like IFBB Pro Olympia route or if I'm not about that life. And I decided I wasn't about that life. Insane for me to think that I had the kind of like I was really like, do I really want to be 280 and lean, right? Like on every all the gear you could think of. Thank God I didn't go that route because I would have hit a wall pretty early and been like, wow, that's stupid. But here's the thing, man. When I decided I don't want to live that life, which was never my choice to make in the first place in hindsight, I said, you know what? I'm going to set a very humble, very realistic physique goal. If I could end up being about 5'7", um, and let's say just a modest 185 at 6% body fat, that's all I need. Like just that's it, you know. And it's like in hindsight, you're like,
Just the
oh, so
world
like
champion natural bodybuilder.
yeah, so you're just walking onto world championship stages and pretty much winning as long as you have decent proportions, right? So again, it was like, do I want to be a Mr. Olympia or do I want to take my foot off the gas and just coast
And
to
just be a natural
185?
Mr. Olympia. Yep.
Yeah, to be a natural. And so what that means is I ran into the hard part and I said, oh, okay. So it turns out you don't make linear gains your whole career. They slow down. And it turns out later in life, uh, I'm not saying that there's, some kind of mysterious metabolism magic going on, but people tend to get fatter as they get older. The data show that. It's a mixture of priorities, lifestyle things, a million other things. So I'm not saying that it's like an inevitable part of age, but people do tend to get fatter as they get older. And so all that is to say, you're going to have to wrestle with when you get to the hard parts in that journey. You have this huge weight loss. Maintaining it's going to be hard. You start building muscle. It'll be easy at first, then it'll get harder. It's not necessarily all that helpful to think about how hard it was supposed to be relative to the norm or the typical person. At the end of the day, you're just going to have to be in it and say, here's how hard it is. Whether I like that or not, the goal is still what the goal is. We may need to adjust it in one direction or the other. But yeah, whenever I get those questions, my answers are usually, first of all, we don't have that data because that's very specific. And second of all, try not to get too bogged down about how hard it's supposed to be because you're going to find out soon enough how hard it is. And that's ultimately what matters. Helms,
Well,
thank you so much for dealing with my dementia and reeling me back into.
I tried.
Sometimes in my conversations now in my old age, I just have to say, can you restate the last 90 seconds of what we were talking about?
Where was I? What happened? You got there. And I will say it was all excellent information. And to the person asking the question, even though Trex might have given you a circuitous answer, I can tell you that when it comes to personal experience across the body fat spectrum, as well as engaging with at the highest level and also struggling with disengaging, a tremendous amount of respect. He's been there. And also, I'd say you're probably the most knowledgeable person in terms of the application, limitation, and actual limits of what we can know about P ratios and the typical myths. And only thing I'm going to add is just to say even more, you should listen to Trex and actually read some of his work. There's a multiple part series on Stronger by Science authored by Trex specifically about P ratios, going back and forth with Meadow Henselmans that even culminated in some awesome podcast appearances where they discussed and debated. And there is still a large amount of lingering misinformation about what P ratios do and don't tell us. And even though it is some deep dives, has some statistics, and digs into some research, it's actually a fascinating read. And I've literally not had anyone dig into it who hasn't been like, oh, man, once I got in there, I couldn't stop reading the whole thing or watching these. So it was eye-opening for me. And yeah, it is, of course, difficult to kind of roll back something that's been well established in a given industry space for a while, but it did culminate in Mike Israetel, who they had a whole handbook based upon P ratios where they said, you know what, here at RP or now RP Strength, we've decided that's not probably the way it is, and here's what's going on, widespread reconceptions of it in the industry based upon your work there. So just we can we I don't know if we can put links or we'll probably forget, but definitely just Google Eric Trexler, Stronger by Science, P ratio. A bunch of good stuff will come up, and just gobble that stuff up, because I think, to me, my first thought when I heard this question is they probably have some misconceptions about what can and can't be extrapolated from a P ratio, on top of everything that you talked about from more of that personal, experiential, and life phase element.
Yeah, no, and it's the whole P ratio thing, at least my engagement with it actually started as a mass article in the Mass Research Review, and then it kind of took on this life of its own into this whole back and forth. And yeah, it culminated in, I think, a fruitful debate. And that is one of the things I've always really respected about Mike and everyone else at RP is being really, really open to engaging with ideas. And it's tough. Like, there's a lot of people who are willing to stake a claim and then defend it to the death. There's no shortage of that in fitness. There's also no shortage of people who are so terrified of being wrong that they'll never say anything interesting. They'll always play it like it's one thing to be responsible with your claims, but another thing to play it so safe that it's like you're not really bringing anything to the table here in terms of like furthering the conversation. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like I'm going to be the last person to acknowledge everything that's like absolutely beaten to death and fully known. And I think that, Mike and RP, I appreciate that they're willing to engage in things that are at least on the periphery of the cutting edge in terms of, I'm going to make a claim here because this makes sense to me. Because if nothing else, it gets people talking, but then they're willing to hear the people talking, and say, those are good points, never mind, or I'm going to tweak it a little bit. So, I thought that was the rare instance of an actual, like, pretty good and ultimately constructive debate, where it wasn't just people saying, here's what the science says. The science was all done wrong. You're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. Okay, let's keep believing what we already believed,
No, well said.
All right, Helms. There's a question here. I don't understand it, but I'm going to run it by you and see if you do. I'm not trying to be like a jerk. I don't get it, but it might just be a terminology thing I'm missing. So the question is, how much in terms of hypertrophy outcomes can we extrapolate from leverage data? I'm not sure what they mean by leverage data. Do you know what they might be referring to there?
I'm assuming that they are specifically talking about data which indicate which muscle is in the best position to produce force at a given joint angle or portion of a range of motion for a given exercise.
Okay. So this is like the bodybuilding biomechanics world.
Yeah. So I'm going to do it. To give some insight into where we were over the last 30 years and some of the speculation as to how do we take an exercise and stimulate muscle growth. Length tension relationship has come into this conversation, and where does a muscle colloquially have the best leverage? So basically, when can it produce a lot of force? And there's a lot of discussions of different motor learning theories and the way that the body works. And I think from a very, very general high level, I'm not going to go into specific theories. It is true that the body will find, from a nervous system perspective, the path of least resistance, ironically, kind of the terminology there. So the idea here is that it's going to recruit the muscles which are best positioned to do a thing. And this is why when you're doing squats, as you get near failure, you can try to be staying nice and upright, just like a Chinese weightlifter. You want to hit those quads, or you just want to stay upright because the internet says you should, or you're trying to get the transfer to a clean, whatever your reason is. And then as you get near failure, what happens? You shoot your hips back, and it becomes a little more of a good morning. You see it on the third attempt squat in powerlifting. You see it on a max recovery from a clean and jerk and Olympic lifting. And you see it on people who are not doing something like a hack squat or a back supported version of something like a pendulum squat in bodybuilding. Let's say you're doing a split machine squat, feet forward, doing everything you can, try to keep it in your quads. You get near failure, you shoot your hips a little bit. This is just simply your body enacting that general principle of motor learning. I'm not here trying to grow your quads. I'm here trying to save you from getting crushed by a barbell. And I'm going to shift you to a position where you're stronger. And that implies that your glutes got a bit more to give. And so maybe your lumbar as well than your quads. Your quads are tapped out. They call uncle. You find another way to get that bar up. And that is true across kind of various, movements. And you can extrapolate that general principle to a lot of things. So the question is, okay, well, what does that mean for hypertrophy? And does that mean that when we're in a position where a muscle group can contribute more force to a given movement, does it make it grow more? And the answer is not necessarily, because the ability to produce force is not, for a movement, is not necessarily the same thing as achieving high tension within a muscle, which is what stimulates hypertrophy. And we can trace this all the way back to understanding what actually stimulates muscle to grow. And we used to think that it was active tension. And when I say active versus passive tension, I'm talking about the actual physiology of the muscle tendon unit, which produces force. So if you look at length tension relationships and length tension curves, you generally see that in what's called the optimal length tension relationship, we produce the most active tension. This is when you can get the most overlap between actin and myosin, the most cross bridges, and therefore the most force production. However, the actual external force production or torque production that we can produce is overlaid with what's called passive tension. And this is force production from the tendon when you're getting near a long muscle length and it is stretched and it's contributing, or when you get the quote-unquote stretch shortening cycle. If you have a short amplitude, quick turnaround from eccentric to concentric, you can leverage some of that, kind of like an elastic spring or rubber band, as an imperfect but decent analogy. But in addition to that, we have intramuscular passive tension as well. So the titin molecule, which anchors actin and myosin to the cytoskeleton at the smallest level within the sarcomere, it unwinds and becomes a molecular spring during the eccentric. And then we also have, and it helps with longitudinal force transmission, kind of like a intramuscular tendon. And then we even have lateral force transmission from what are called costomeres, or sometimes called focal adhesions in older publications, which help with that force production in that direction. And it seems that it is not just active, but also passive tension that can induce hypertrophy. And we've actually known this, believe it or not, from animal models going all the way back to the 70s, where you weight a wing of an animal for hours, weeks, months, and it induces not just sarcomerogenesis and longitudinal changes in hypertrophy and the ability to still produce force at long muscle lengths due to that change, but also radial hypertrophy, your traditional hypertrophy, growth, just general size. And this is even observed when you de-innervate the nerve. So it can occur in passive stretching, and it is a local phenomenon which induces muscle growth. It's not just your ability to produce force and have active motor unit recruitment. And some of the structures that I described earlier are mechanosensors in and of themselves. So the structures which contribute to intramuscular passive tension development are also stimulating MPS via, mTOR and other pathways to create growth. And this is why longer muscle length training, if you were to look at it from a kind of performance-based biomechanics lens, you're like, oh, that's a terrible position to put that muscle in to produce force. You're on one end too far of the length tension relationship. How can you get any, cross bridging there? And you won't be able to produce force. And this is actually trash. You want to be at a muscle specific region where the optimal length tension relationship is. And that was some of the old speculation, but we're not seeing that. Generally, putting a muscle in a longer length seems to induce more hypertrophy, and you can also induce hypertrophy even without motor unit recruitment, as shown by those old animal studies and some of the studies on passive stretching, static stretching for long time periods that's now been even extended to humans. And the last thing I will say is that there are even more mechanosensors that we're still uncovering that get stimulated by being at a long muscle length. So myonuclear flattening is one where you stretch that muscle out, the nuclei get compressed, and that leads to signaling, which may induce growth from a mechanistic perspective. So it's not active tension only. It is probably a combination of active and passive tension, which may be one of the reasons why at least stretching, if not also training at longer muscle lengths, seems to induce more hypertrophy. So from a performance perspective, yes, you want to care about quote-unquote leverage, and the muscles which are able to produce the most force are going to be the ones that are emphasized by the central nervous system. But from a hypertrophy perspective, which is what the question is, it is more about the local tension that is sensed and then mechanotransduced into signals for hypertrophy, which sometimes means you're in actually a pretty poor position to produce force.
Yeah. Perfect. Awesome answer. I'm glad we have our resident bodybuilding biomechanics guy on hand for those kinds of questions. Helms, I think this is probably a good time to wrap up. We've been going close to 90 minutes now. So since you're going to be gone a couple weeks, is there anything you want to say to the good people before you go?
Trex and I have resolved things, but if for some reason something happens while I'm not here, Trex gets misinformation or he's misinformed, which I'm not blaming him on that happening. I will say, he trusts his sources. I don't know those sources because he's a good journalist. He doesn't share them with me. But if those sources lead him to believe that I have abandoned the iron, please be skeptical. That's all I would ask.
Perfect. And folks, obviously it's a shifting landscape. You never know when someone's going to abandon the iron or the culture underlying the iron, but obviously we'll take that into advisement as we move forward. And certainly people can check up on your socials and stay up to date with how your shows are going, I assume.
Absolutely. I will probably in the next couple days, I need to get on it and release my my next part in my YouTube series of my prep so I can cover what just happened, get a physique update, and let people know, hey, I'm going to be competing in 11 days. My God. So yeah, 12 days, something like that.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of the Iron Culture, I feel comfortable speaking for them and saying we wish you luck with your string of shows here. So we'll be following closely, and if you text me some updates, I can relay them to the good people. But yeah, good luck, safe travels, and folks, we will still be back here. You know the drill, Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So we will be back in 1 week with yet another episode of Iron Culture.